Rick and Morty looks like a crude comedy about a drunk genius and his anxious grandson. But by episode 6 of season 1, the show had already quietly swapped its main characters. The originals were dead and buried in the backyard, and the replacements simply moved in silently. In this video, we break down Rick and Morty's most mind-bending episodes. Section 1. Rick Potion Number 9. Morty Smith is not a complicated person to understand. His face gives everything away before his voice catches up. The nervous blinking, the shoulder drop when he's resigned to something bad, the particular silence that settles over him when Rick is about to make things dramatically worse. 6 episodes into the first season, viewers had already developed a working sense of how the show operated. Rick dragged Morty into something dangerous. Morty protested the whole way through. Things spiraled into chaos. And somewhere before the credits, the situation resolved into a rough approximation of where it started. The dynamic was reliable, the chaos had structure, the adventures were dark and funny, and crucially, contained. Rick Potion Number 9, which aired on January 27, 2014, and was written by Justin Roiland and directed by Steven Sandoval, is the 6th episode of the first season. It dismantled the assumption that things resolve before the credits, quietly and completely, and it never put that assumption back. Everything starts with a problem calibrated to feel minor. Morty has a crush on a classmate named Jessica. She has been a background fixture since the pilot, close enough that Morty notices her constantly, but far enough that noticing has always been the full extent of it. There's a school dance coming up. Morty wants a love potion, something that will make Jessica feel something for him, just long enough for one dance. Not a relationship, not anything permanent. One dance. The request is so small, so completely human in its smallness, that it feels like the setup for a lesson that will arrive within 20 minutes and leave everyone roughly where they started. Prairie voles are the scientific basis Rick uses for the compound. These small rodents became well known in research for forming intense, lasting pair bonds, driven by specific brain chemicals tied to attachment. Studies on them suggested that devotion is more mechanically predictable than most people are comfortable knowing. The feeling of love has a structure, and the structure can be reverse engineered, and Rick can do it in his garage in an afternoon. Early in the episode, before any of the chaos begins, Rick tells Morty that what people call love is just a chemical reaction that compels animals to breed. He says it hits hard and then fades slowly, leaving people stranded in failing marriages. He says it as a lecture, as a dismissal of Morty's feelings, but the episode is about to demonstrate that Rick is more right about this than he intended, in a way that makes the rightness deeply unsettling. He calibrates the compound to Jessica's DNA, hands it to Morty with instructions not to cause problems, and sends him off. Caution lasts roughly 4 minutes into the school dance. Morty uses the potion on Jessica. It makes contact. For a brief window, everything seems to be working exactly as intended. Then the complication surfaces. A flu virus has been circulating through the school, and when the love compound bonds with the virus in Jessica's system, it becomes airborne. Flu spreads the way it always does in a crowded space, through proximity and shared air and people standing closer together than they probably should. Everyone who catches the flu now falls completely and irrevocably in love with Morty. Not gradually, not with any ambiguity. The chemistry hits hard, exactly as Rick described, and every social and rational filter in the human brain shuts down around it. Society begins collapsing within the hour. The infection does not stop at the gym. It follows the flu's natural path outward from the school, through the town, in all directions. The entire human population outside of Morty's immediate family, who share enough of his DNA to be immune, begins reorganizing itself around him as a single point of fixation. Adults leave their cars in the middle of roads. Normal life dissolves at the molecular level and is replaced by a single, overwhelming priority. Rick and Morty retreat to the garage and watch through the window as the world outside stops being recognizable. An antidote built from mantis DNA is Rick's first move. The biological logic is straightforward enough that Rick can state it without much explanation. Female praying mantises kill their mates after mating. An antidote derived from something that destroys what it's attached to should cancel the devotion and return everyone to functional baseline. He deploys it globally. The love dissolves. What fills the space where the love was is significantly worse. Everyone infected now carries the mating and hunting instincts of a mantis. They still want Morty, but in a sequence of events that leads somewhere much darker. The crowd shifts from lovesick to predatory. Rick and Morty run. Back in the garage, Rick assembles a second antidote with more urgency and less certainty than the first. He pulls from multiple DNA sources, mixes things that in a calmer moment he might consider more carefully, and deploys the result on a planetary scale. The cure goes out, the mutation begins, and what emerges from it stops the episode completely. Cronenberg's. That is what Rick calls the creatures that replace almost every human on Earth. He says it with the tone of someone applying a classification that already exists, not coining a new term, but locating the right one, as if taxonomy has a natural category for this, and he is simply placing the situation correctly within it. The reference is to David Cronenberg, the Canadian filmmaker who spent decades building a body of work around what happens when the human body loses its coherence. David Cronenberg's films operate in a specific register of horror that sets them apart from most of the genre. The threat is not external. There are no creatures from outside, no haunted locations, nothing that intrudes from some other realm and can be defeated or escaped. The danger in a Cronenberg film comes from inside the body itself, from flesh becoming something that no longer follows the expectations the mind has set for it. In The Fly, released in 1986, a scientist undergoes a slow and horrifying physical transformation after a molecular teleportation accident fuses his DNA with a housefly. The film watches this transformation with a level of biological specificity that makes it worse the more carefully the viewer pays attention, because it follows a kind of logic, and logic applied to the dissolution of the human body is more disturbing than random horror. In Videodrome, a television signal causes its viewer's body to develop something like a biological slot that accepts videocassettes as physical objects. In Naked Lunch, the act of writing becomes an organic function, and the machines the characters use begin to behave like living things. The through line is that the body is provisional, that the conditions for radical transformation are always present inside it, and that what feels stable and solid about physical existence is only ever temporary. Cronenberg spent his career making audiences feel the truth of this, and making that feeling deeply uncomfortable. Looking at the creatures in this episode through that lens, Rick's naming choice carries more weight than a simple film reference. The Cronenbergs are humanoid in origin and wrong in execution. Flesh rearranged into configurations the eye rejects. Something that used to be a person and lost the specifications mid-process. The animation commits to making them look genuinely grotesque, without dwelling on them long enough to shift the episode into pure horror. They are there, they are wrong, and Rick makes his decision. Scanning the situation, Rick runs the numbers in his head. An entire planet converted. A single house of surviving normal humans in the middle of a ruined world. Reversing the mutation across a global population would require sustained effort with uncertain results, and Rick does not think the math supports that approach. He has a scanner. He uses it to search across parallel realities until he finds a dimension sufficiently close to their own where the crisis played out differently. He finds one. In that dimension, an alternate Rick and an alternate Morty faced the same crisis, built a working cure, and saved their world. They also both died the same afternoon from an unrelated lab accident, in the same hours that their cure was going to work. Timing and outcome in the multiverse are not connected in any predictable way. The versions of Rick and Morty who did everything right, who succeeded at the one thing their counterparts failed at, died anyway, from something completely separate, on the same afternoon they saved the world. This is what infinite parallel realities look like when every possible combination of events occurs somewhere. The cure works, the people who made it die regardless, and the world they saved keeps going without them. Rick found the specific dimension where that combination happened to leave a vacancy that could be filled. He points out to Morty that they should actually be grateful the mess they made was bad enough to send them here, because if it weren't, they would have been the pair who died in the lab explosion. The gratitude Morty feels for this framing is approximately zero. He explains the plan to Morty without softening it. They will cross over. They will take the place of the dead alternates. The ruined world stays ruined. Morty will go to school in a dimension he has never lived in, with a family that has no idea what happened, and he will be the version of himself that grew up in that house, and he will carry none of this outwardly for the rest of his life. Rick says it the way someone reads out the practical steps of a process that needs to happen before dinner. Ground needs to be broken before anyone comes home. Rick retrieves the bodies of their dead alternates from the lab using tongs, efficiently and without ceremony, because the practical problem of the bodies needs solving and there is no time to treat it as anything other than a practical problem. But it is Morty who takes the shovel. Morty who breaks the ground in the backyard of a house he has never been inside, in a dimension where he has no history, where the version of him who grew up here is already dead in a lab on the other side of the portal. He stands at the edge of the hole and watches himself get lowered in. He watches Rick go in beside him. He pats the dirt back down over the top. 14 years old, and he buries himself. Scored to Look On Down from the Bridge by Mazzy Star. This moment reaches for an emotional frequency most television does not attempt. The song, from the 1996 album Among My Swan, is built on restraint. A slow, open guitar line that sounds like a room after everyone has left, and a vocal from Hope Sandoval that seems to be delivered from somewhere the listener cannot quite locate or reach. The song makes no demands on the viewer's feelings. It does not underline the image or push toward a particular response. The lyrics speak of saying goodbye, of waiting, of looking down from somewhere high and finding the world still going on below without registering the significance of what just happened. The song simply occupies the same space as the scene on screen and allows the weight to settle at its own pace. Emotional categories stop applying cleanly to what Morty is experiencing in that moment. He does not break down, he does not argue or demand an explanation or catalog the injustice of what was just done to him. He goes quiet in a way that suggests he has traveled somewhere internal that does not yet have language attached to it. Something happened to him that the existing vocabulary of shock and grief and fear was not built to describe. He buried himself. He crossed into a parallel dimension, held a shovel, and covered up the physical proof that he ever existed in the world he came from. The song continues as he walks inside the house, absorbing the shock of the entire event. Now he is supposed to sit at a dinner table with strangers who believe he is someone who grew up among them. Sitting in the dirt beside him before all of that, Rick says what Rick says when philosophy is the only available tool. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everyone dies. The logic holds. The comfort is approximately zero. Both of them understand this clearly. Inside the house, the Beth and Summer and Jerry of this dimension come home and find Rick and Morty in the backyard. And Tuesday continues. Nobody asks about the freshly turned earth near the fence. There is no marker above the grave. The family that was never his family puts dinner on the table. Morty sits down with them. 2 seasons later, in a different episode, Morty explains his internal state to Summer. His sister is upset about the family situation, and Morty tells her to look outside, toward the backyard, toward a spot near the fence. He tells her that the version of himself who grew up in this house is buried 20 yards from where they're sitting. He tells her that this knowledge, this fact he carries, is the thing that allows him to function when most things would be unbearable. The nihilism that defines Morty in his most honest moments is not an abstract philosophical position he reasoned his way into. It is something that happened to him at 14 years old, with a shovel in a backyard he had never visited before that day. After the credits, the ruined dimension registers one final time. In the Cronenberg world, Jerry and Beth and Summer are still alive, the last 3 normal humans in a world overrun by mutations. Summer is performing Quint's speech from Jaws in something resembling a recreation. Jerry and Beth admit to each other that they are actually happier with Rick and Morty gone. Then a portal opens. Through it come 2 figures, a Cronenberg Rick and a Cronenberg Morty. Their forms reshaped in the same way as the creatures surrounding them. In their home dimension, everyone was naturally a Cronenberg, and their version of Rick accidentally cured the whole world, converting everyone to normal human form. Unable to exist in a dimension where they no longer fit, they have crossed over to the world where the inverse catastrophe happened. Every ruined world is someone else's natural habitat. Every catastrophe mirrors itself somewhere in the infinite collection of parallel realities. The mistake runs in both directions simultaneously, and it always will. What makes Rick Potion number 9 the foundation of everything the show becomes is not the horror of the Cronenbergs or the mechanics of the multiverse. From this episode onward, the Rick and Morty the audience is watching are not the original inhabitants of the dimension where Season 1 began. The real Morty of that world is under the dirt in the backyard. 2 replacements crossed a dimensional boundary, buried the evidence, closed the door behind them, and sat down for dinner. No announcement was made. The next episode simply began. The audience was watching different people in the same house, and the show kept going, and that quiet fact sat in the background of every episode afterward like something everyone in the room agreed not to mention, in a room where the agreement itself was never spoken aloud. Before we move on, If you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The show established its most permanent rule in episode 6. Consequences don't disappear, they just get buried. Next, the episode that handed the whole family a pair of goggles and let them see exactly who they would never get to become. Section 2. 60 Minutes. Season 1, Episode 8 of Rick and Morty aired on March 17, 2014. Written by Tom Kaufman and Justin Roiland, and directed by Pete Michels. It is the first episode of the series to ask a question the show has returned to in different forms ever since. What does it do to a person to see, clearly and in detail, every version of themselves they will never get to be? Unimpressed with what regular television has to offer on a given evening, Rick destroys the family's existing cable box and builds a replacement from scratch. The new version receives programming from every dimension in the multiverse. The result is infinite television. Channels from realities where the basic logic of existence runs on entirely different assumptions, where what makes something a story, or a product, or a performance has been replaced by frameworks that have no equivalent in the world Rick and Morty normally inhabit. Rick and Morty settle in front of it and start watching. The first few channels produce something genuinely strange and genuinely funny in the way that only content with no familiar reference point can be. A commercial for an insurance company featuring a man whose eyes are full of ants, who insists this condition is entirely normal, that he simply cannot see and cannot hear, and who seems puzzled that anyone finds this worth remarking on. A short film about a series of escalating threats. A cartoon that functions as a Garfield parody, except the cat is named Gazorpazorpfield and his owner John has died, leaving the cat to grieve in a register that is both sincere and entirely wrong. Channel after channel of this content plays in the background while the rest of the family uses something separate. Rick produces a pair of goggles that allow whoever puts them on to see through the eyes of their alternate self. Not to observe from outside as a spectator, but to inhabit the perspective, to feel from the inside what it is like to be the version of themselves that exists in a world where the circumstances happen to line up differently. Beth, Jerry, and Summer take turns. Rick and Morty stay on the couch. The episode runs both tracks at the same time, and the contrast between the two is where the discomfort lives. On one side of the room, alien absurdism that means nothing and goes nowhere. On the other, the specific and very personal horror of someone finding out exactly what they are not. For the rest of the family, the goggles begin as something that feels like a fantasy. Jerry's alternate life is what he has always suspected he deserved on some level. In that dimension, he became a successful actor. He is seen doing cocaine with Johnny Depp at what appears to be an awards ceremony, living the kind of celebrated, excess-saturated existence that sits at the maximum possible distance from his current circumstances. Jerry in the main timeline is unemployed, living in his daughter's house because his own marriage is precarious, dimly aware that most of the people around him find him disappointing. The goggle version is respected, free, and clearly not thinking about any of this. The real Jerry watches himself be everything he isn't, through a device that makes the gap between the two selves feel physically present. Beth's version of herself carries a different kind of sting. Her alternate self is operating on a person rather than a horse. This single detail, the kind that sounds almost minor when described out loud, lands with the weight of the entire first season behind it. Beth is a horse surgeon. She is good at it. But horse surgeon and human surgeon are not the same thing, and the difference between the two represents the gap between the life she ended up in and the life she might have had access to if the timing had worked differently. The goggles do not show Beth a fantasy version of herself. They show her a version of her own intelligence and competence that was allowed to go somewhere more prestigious, in a world where the conditions happen to permit it. The person is the same. What the person gets to be is the difference. Summer gets the worst of the three discoveries by a considerable distance. She puts on the goggles and finds that in the overwhelming majority of parallel realities, she does not exist. The set of circumstances that resulted in Summer's birth, the specific relationship between Beth and Jerry, and the specific decisions they made at the specific moment that led to her, did not occur in most versions of the multiverse. In the timelines where she does exist, the information gets harder before it gets any better. She learns that in those realities, her parents almost ended the pregnancy. The goggles deliver both pieces of knowledge in close succession. In most universes, she is not there, and in the ones where she is, the decision not to have her was considered and nearly made. The combination is not the kind of information a teenager is prepared to receive on a regular evening in the living room. Almost none of the cable segments have a script behind them. The interdimensional television content was improvised by Roiland in the recording booth, working in real time, following the logic of each absurd premise as it arrived without knowing in advance where any of it was going. The segments have a texture that is different from every other piece of dialogue in the episode because they were produced differently. They feel like someone turning on a television in a room where narrative logic does not apply, which is exactly what they are supposed to feel like. The absurdism is not decorative. The lack of structure in the cable content is the point of the cable content. Roiland's improvisational approach to the segments required a specific kind of commitment. The comedy in the anti-insurance salesman sketch, for example, comes entirely from the character's total conviction that nothing is wrong, his puzzlement at any suggestion to the contrary, his continued insistence that his inability to see or hear is just a normal feature of a normal life. That kind of humor cannot be planned. The commitment to the premise is only available in real time, when the only option is to go further into whatever the situation demands, rather than falling back on a script. The segments work because they do not feel like someone performing absurdism. They feel like absurdism that is simply happening. Neither Rick nor Morty uses the goggles at any point during the episode. Rick's relationship with infinite parallel realities is too direct and too extensive for a device like this to change or disturb anything he already knows. He has visited more dimensions than any goggle could catalog. Morty, for reasons the episode is slowly moving toward revealing, is past the point where a tool that shows alternate versions of his life could do anything new to his understanding of what is real. He watches the cable and eats his snacks and leaves the rest of the family to learn things that cannot be unlearned. By the time the episode reaches its midpoint, the goggles have done what the goggles were always going to do. Beth and Jerry are in an argument that is not specifically about any one thing, but about what the goggles made visible. The evidence that the life they built together, the choices they made, and the choices they didn't, pushed both of them away from something better. They see their alternate selves succeeding, and not together. The implication sits between them without needing to be stated. They agree to separate. The marriage appears to be ending in the living room while Rick and Morty watch programming from a dimension where the fundamental assumptions of reality are different from the ones in this kitchen. Out of this collapse, Summer decides she has had enough and moves toward the door. She has learned in the space of one evening that she barely exists across the multiverse, that her parents are splitting up, and that the alternate versions of those parents did not include her in their lives. Leaving seems like the only available response to the full weight of all of this landing at once. When Summer reaches the door, Morty is there. He stops her, and then does something that is, for the character, genuinely unusual. He tells the truth. Not a softened or reassuring version of it, but the actual information. He tells her about the backyard. He explains that the Rick and Morty she grew up with are buried out there, that they came from a different dimension after their home world was ruined, that they crossed over and assumed the lives of dead alternates, and that this house has a grave in the yard with their names on it. He tells her all of this, and then he tells her that this is precisely why she should come back inside. Facing his sister at the door with the full reality of everything he has just said, Morty makes the argument the episode has been building toward since its first frame. Nobody exists on purpose. Nobody belongs anywhere. Everyone is going to die eventually, so they may as well watch television. Stripped of context, the sentence sounds like the punchline to a joke about meaninglessness, the final line of a bit that has nowhere left to go. But it is delivered by someone who knows about the grave in the backyard because he dug it himself, by someone for whom the meaninglessness is not a philosophical position, but a factual condition of his actual life. Morty is not recommending despair or resignation, he is recommending presence. He is telling Summer that the accidental quality of her existence, the fact that she barely made it into this particular timeline, is not different from the accidental quality of anyone else's existence, including his own. The stakes are already as low as they can get. Nobody belongs anywhere. The night is still happening. Come watch television. Nobody who quotes that speech uses it as a reason to stop trying. It became one of the most frequently cited pieces of dialogue in the series almost immediately after the episode aired, and what audiences consistently take from it is not the hopelessness in the words, but something warmer and more functional underneath them. Morty is telling his sister that the randomness of existence is the shared condition, not the unique burden, and that recognizing it clears a certain kind of weight rather than adding to it. The nihilism in the speech is a relief, not a verdict. That line puts the episode's two storylines in contact with each other in a way the episode has been withholding until this moment. The cable segments, the improvised alien television with its commitment to premises that go nowhere and mean nothing, are what Morty and Rick have been doing instead of looking through the goggles. They are choosing the thing that is actually in front of them over the infinite catalog of alternatives. Rick, who has access to more of those alternatives than any device could show him, has decided the best use of this particular evening is a couch and bizarre television. Morty, who knows what the backyard feels like, agrees. The cable is not escapism, it is the decision to be in the room. Alternate Jerry's televised breakdown saves the marriage from a direction no one inside the house could have predicted. Beth and Jerry, continuing to watch their alternate selves through the goggles, eventually see those alternate selves in their own form of crisis. Alternate Jerry, the celebrated and successful version, has a public breakdown. The famous, admired version of him falls apart on television in a way that reaches Beth through the goggles with enough clarity that the argument inside the house shifts. They find that the alternate versions of themselves, separated and free of each other, are not simply better or happier. The problems changed. The problems did not go away. They stay together. Several threads resolve in the final minutes without ceremony. Summer comes back inside, the cable continues, and the family sits in the same room together watching television that makes no sense. The show frames this as a version of a happy ending without calling it one. Not a triumph, not a clean resolution, just the decision to remain in the life that is actually happening rather than the ones the goggles made available. 60 Minutes is not the most structurally complex episode the show produced, and it is not the most cosmically strange. What it does, better than almost any other episode in the first season, is locate the emotional argument underneath the sci-fi premise. The goggles and the cable and the multiverse are all architecture. The thing the episode is about is the question of what someone owes to the life they are actually living, given that every other version of that life is also theoretically available and theoretically better. Morty's answer, delivered at a door to a sister he barely grew up with in a dimension he was never meant to inhabit, is the only answer the show has ever been able to defend. Nobody belongs anywhere, and here is fine, and come watch TV. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. 60 Minutes found the show's emotional foundation through borrowed goggles and a cable box that shouldn't exist. Next, the Season 2 premiere that broke time itself with a sibling argument and left Rick floating in a void surrounded by Schrodinger's cats. Section 3. A Wrinkle in Time. Frozen time has practical benefits. You can throw a party, wreck the house, spend 6 months putting it back together, and when normal time resumes, nobody who was paused outside ever notices a thing. This is the logic Rick used at the end of the first season, when he froze time so the three of them could clean up after a chaotic party before Beth and Jerry came home. What Rick did not fully account for, or chose not to mention until the moment it became unavoidable, is what happens to a person who lives for 6 months outside of time and then has to rejoin it. Their relationship with time becomes unstable. Their chronological position relative to the rest of reality is fragile in a specific and dangerous way, and if something disrupts that fragile position before it stabilizes, the consequences are not small. Written by Matt Roller and directed by Wes Archer, A Wrinkle in Time aired on July 26, 2015, as the premiere of the second season. Despite being leaked online before its official broadcast, it tied for the most watched cable program on the night it aired, which suggests that audiences who had seen it early watched it again when the actual premiere happened, which is its own kind of measurement of how the episode landed. 6 months passed inside frozen time before the events of the episode begin. Rick, Morty, and Summer cleaned the house, lived their lives in suspended reality, and used the time the way people use unexpected free time when nobody is watching. When the episode opens, they are finishing the last of the cleaning. Jerry and Beth are paused in the yard, mid-expression, waiting to be unfrozen. Rick bribes Morty and Summer to agree to let him send their parents out for ice cream, immediately after time resumes, removing them from the situation until the temporal instability the three of them carry has a chance to settle. Before Rick unfreezes time, he gives Morty and Summer a warning that the show will use as its entire premise for the next 22 minutes. He tells them their time might be unstable for a while. He tells them not to touch their parents. He frames this in the most minimal possible terms. As a precaution, a brief period of adjustment that will resolve on its own if they just avoid any action that could generate uncertainty. This is, as warnings go, extremely insufficient for the scale of what the warning is actually warning about. Sibling rivalry is the mechanism that breaks time. After Beth and Jerry leave for ice cream, Morty and Summer get into an argument about who is closer to Rick, who is more valued, who matters more to their grandfather. They shove each other. Their bickering and the emotional uncertainty it generates, two people simultaneously uncertain about their position relative to someone they both want approval from, creates what Rick calls a feedback loop of uncertainty. Their reality splits. One moment, there are three of them standing in the garage, and the next moment, there are two versions of three people standing in two separate but mostly synchronized versions of the same garage. They are no longer on any timeline. They are in the space between timelines, in the gap that opens when reality cannot decide which of two equally possible states is the correct one. Visually, the episode does something unusual with this premise. Rather than cutting back and forth between the two parallel versions, the show displays them simultaneously. The screen divided into two panels running side by side. Each panel shows one version of events. The two Ricks, the two Mortys, the two Summers move in near-perfect synchrony because most of their moment-to-moment decisions are the same. When a choice differs between panels, the timelines drift slightly out of sync. The visual structure makes the viewer feel the instability rather than just understand it intellectually. The split screen is not a stylistic choice. It is the episode's argument made into a picture. Floating through the black void surrounding the garage are cats, Schrodinger's cats. Rick identifies them, noting that he assumes they both are and are not floating there simultaneously, just like everything else in the space they currently occupy. The reference is to a thought experiment proposed by Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger in 1935, designed to illustrate what he saw as a problem with one interpretation of quantum mechanics. In the thought experiment, a cat is placed in a sealed box with a device that may or may not release a poison, depending on the decay of a single radioactive atom. Until the box is opened and the cat is observed, its state cannot be determined. According to the interpretation Schrödinger was criticizing, the cat exists in a superposition of both alive and dead simultaneously until the act of observation collapses it into one state or the other. Schrödinger intended this as a reductio ad absurdum, a way of pointing out how strange this interpretation becomes when applied to large objects. Rick and Morty uses it as a literal visual. There are cats in the void, and they both are and are not there, and this is fine, and the episode keeps going. Quantum uncertainty, applied to Rick and Morty's specific situation, means that the act of being unsure causes the reality around them to fracture. The connection between mental state and physical outcome is not a metaphor in the episode. It is the operating rule of the environment they are stuck in. Every moment of genuine uncertainty they produce either delays the timelines merging back together or actively pushes them further apart. Rick has a time crystal, a piece of crystallized material capable of interacting with the flow of time, which he attempts to use to stitch the two timelines back into one. But every time he gets close, Morty and Summer introduce more uncertainty by continuing to be anxious teenagers who cannot stop bickering, and the crystal cannot complete the process. Distrusting his alternate self turns out to be Rick's contribution to making everything worse. Each Rick in each timeline begins to suspect that the other Rick is acting against him, planning to eliminate the competition, taking actions in his parallel timeline that will disadvantage the Rick watching from the other panel. This suspicion, because it is an act of uncertainty about what someone else is doing, causes the timelines to split again. One of the Ricks actually modifies a weapon to fire across the timeline divide and attempts to shoot his alternate self. The situation escalates from 2 realities to 4, then to more, the panels multiplying on screen until the structure is barely holding together. Uncertainty, as Rick states it plainly in the middle of this chaos, is inherently unsustainable. Everything eventually either is or is not. He tells them they have about 4 hours to be an is before the situation collapses entirely. The precision of that deadline, delivered while the screen is divided into multiple simultaneous versions of the same collapsing garage, functions as both a joke about Rick's ability to calculate things under pressure and a statement of actual physical principle. Quantum superposition cannot hold indefinitely. Observation, decision, and the passage of time all push a system toward resolution. The episode is a race against the collapse of the uncertain state. With the situation at 4 simultaneous realities and deteriorating fast, a fourth-dimensional being arrives. The creature has a body the episode does not spend time explaining, and a head that is shaped in a way that is unmistakably comedic. It scolds Rick. It tells him that the time crystal he used to freeze time in the first season was obtained illegally, that such crystals are controlled materials, and that the consequence for unauthorized use is a lifetime sentence in time prison. Then it gives Rick, Morty, and Summer time-stabilizing collars, not as a kindness, but because the collars are the mechanism by which the being intends to transport them to serve their sentence. Keegan-Michael Key and Jordan Peele, the comedic duo known for their sketch series, voice the fourth-dimensional being across its two-dimensional manifestations in the split timelines. The casting functions as a kind of structural joke. The episode extends over several minutes. 2 comedians known for playing off each other are assigned to a pair of beings from a dimension where the normal rules of individual existence do not apply, appearing in parallel timelines simultaneously, each version of the being attempting to respond to each version of the chaos in front of it. They are perfectly suited to an episode built entirely around parallel selves. Time-stabilizing collars become the central problem rather than the solution almost immediately. Rick tells Morty and Summer to break off the collars to avoid time prison, which introduces another chain of uncertainty and multiplies the realities further. They defeat the being after a prolonged sequence that plays out across multiple simultaneous timelines. Summer's collar works. It transports her back to stable time. But when one of the Mortys tries to put on his collar, it is broken. The floor of the garage gives way beneath him, and he falls into the void. Falling into a space that exists between timelines, between the certain and the uncertain, between existing and not existing, Morty drops away from the garage. Rick dives after him. He catches Morty in the void and understands the situation instantly. Morty's collar is gone. Rick gives Morty his own collar. The collar works. Morty is transported back to stable time. Rick is left alone, floating in the space between realities, with no collar, no timeline, and no mechanism by which to return. Suspended alone in the void, Rick makes a statement that the show treats with complete sincerity. He tells Morty to be good. He says to be better than him. He says he is okay with this. Rick Sanchez, who has survived more impossible situations than any other character in the series, who has access to more scientific knowledge than anyone in his corner of the multiverse, who built an escape from a galactic prison out of nothing but improvisation and arrogance, accepts that this is where it ends. The acceptance is not dramatic. He says it the way someone says something they have always expected on some level, without surprise or resentment. Be good, be better than me, and that is it. Prayer is not something the show presents as part of Rick's repertoire. He is explicitly and consistently atheistic throughout the series. He talks about the meaninglessness of existence the way other people talk about the weather, often and without emotion. But floating in the void between timelines, with no options available and nothing moving within reach, Rick spots something. Morty's dropped collar is drifting below him in the void. And something shifts. He scrambles for it, praying openly and desperately, asking God, then sweet Jesus, then God in heaven, calling out in the most literal possible way for something to go right. He gets the collar. He fixes it. He is transported back to stable time. Immediately upon arriving, Rick reverts completely. There is no God, he announces. In your face. The prayer evaporates the moment the emergency is over, as if it never happened, as if the voice that was calling out to God in heaven 30 seconds ago belonged to someone else entirely. The episode treats this as a punchline, but allows it to sit for a moment longer than a pure punchline would. Rick in the void was not performing. Rick on the other side of the void cannot admit what happened in the void. The distance between those two responses is one of the more quietly revealing things the season premiere does with the character. Running parallel to the main crisis is the Beth and Jerry subplot, which the show frames as a deliberate contrast. While Rick, Morty, and Summer are fracturing time through acts of uncertainty, Beth and Jerry go out for ice cream, hit a deer with their car, and spend the episode trying to save it. The subplot is earthy, small, and grounded in exactly the kind of stakes that have nothing to do with quantum mechanics or parallel realities. Beth is trying to use her veterinary skills. Jerry is trying to be helpful in his particular way. The deer may or may not survive. Meanwhile, on the other track, reality is splitting into 4 simultaneous versions. Rick tells Morty, before the chaos begins, that he assumes Beth and Jerry are off having some pointless grounded story about their marriage. He is almost exactly right, and the episode suggests this is not an insult. Dan Harmon described the approach to the Season 2 premiere in a 2015 interview by saying that at some point the goal became to blow minds. The episode delivers on that goal through a structure that asks more of its audience than most animated comedies would attempt. The split-screen parallel timeline format requires the viewer to track multiple simultaneous versions of the same scene, catch the moments where the versions diverge, and hold both versions in mind at the same time. The Schrodinger's cats in the void require familiarity with a specific physics thought experiment to land properly. The episode assumes an audience willing to work a little. Despite being leaked before it officially aired, A Wrinkle in Time tied as the most-watched cable program on the night of its broadcast. Some portion of that audience had already seen it. They watched again anyway. The episode is structured in a way that rewards a second viewing almost more than a first, because the moments where the timelines diverge become visible once someone knows where to look for them, and the mechanics of how the split-screen sequences are staged become clearer when the viewer is not also trying to follow the plot for the first time. How A Wrinkle in Time works as a piece of television is inseparable from what it is about. An episode about the collapse of certainty into parallel possibilities asks its viewer to sit with two versions of events simultaneously, to hold uncertainty in mind without resolving it, and to trust that the resolution will arrive when the system forces it. Rick's statement is the thesis. Uncertainty is unsustainable, and everything eventually either is or is not. The episode is the demonstration. And the demonstration includes a man floating alone in a void between timelines, calling out to a God he does not believe in, because certainty about God's non-existence is also, it turns out, a kind of uncertainty. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. A Wrinkle in Time built its most revealing Rick moment out of a void between timelines and a dropped collar. Next, the episode that filled the Smith house with strangers and asked whether a happy memory is enough to prove that someone is real. Section 4. Total Rickle. Total Rickle aired on August 16, 2015, written by Mike McMahon and directed by Juan Meza-León. The title is a reference to the 1990 science fiction film Total Recall, which centers on a character who cannot trust whether his memories are real or implanted. But the actual creative origin, confirmed by producer Ryan Ridley, was different. McMahon pitched the episode by describing a specific season of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and the idea it introduced became the episode's foundation. Uncle Steve's death establishes the rules quickly. Rick explains what he is, an alien parasite that reproduces by implanting false memories in its hosts. The parasite generates a warm, detailed recollection of itself being part of the family, and the memory makes it physically real, present in the room, accepted. The host does not question the memory because it feels like every other memory. It sits in the same place, with the same weight, indistinguishable from anything that genuinely happened. And once the parasite is established, it creates new memories featuring new characters, who also become physically real. The infestation compounds. Rick has brought a rock from space with parasite pods attached, which he threw away without examining, and those pods are now inside the house and multiplying at the rate that flashbacks can generate them. Memory parasites, as the episode designs them, have one exploitable limitation: they can only generate pleasant memories. Their reproductive mechanism depends on implanting experiences that feel warm and good, because pleasant memories are what make a person accept a stranger as family without question. Nobody examines a happy memory with the same skepticism they bring to a bad one. Happiness lowers the guard. The parasites understand this at a biological level and build their entire life cycle around it. Rick seals the house with a blast shield to contain the infestation and prevent any parasites from escaping to infect the wider world, and the episode becomes a confined space problem. The family is locked in with an unknown number of infiltrators, and every new flashback could introduce another one. Locking down the house while the infestation grows produces the episode's most visually inventive sequence. The living room fills with characters. Each one arrives via a flashback, and each flashback is rendered in a different visual style, the animation shifting to match whatever genre or era the memory is pretending to come from. A Western flashback, a wartime flashback, a tropical vacation flashback. Each new style is both a joke about how memory works and a demonstration of how the parasite exploits the brain's readiness to accept stored experience at face value. The room that started with 6 people at a dinner table becomes something out of a Where's Waldo illustration, Rick's own description of the situation, crowded with creatures that have no business being there and no way to challenge their right to be present. Happy memories are the episode's weapon and its trap simultaneously. Because every memory the parasites generate is positive, the family cannot distinguish parasite characters from real ones through emotional register alone. The fake memories feel exactly like the real ones, perhaps warmer and more vivid, because warmth is what the parasite optimizes for. They do not produce memories of awkward holidays, petty arguments, or moments of cruelty, because those kinds of memories would not make the host accept the parasite as belonging there. The pleasure is the mechanism of the deception, and the limitation is the episode's eventual solution once Morty arrives at the crucial realization about how real relationships actually work. Among the characters who populate the house as the infestation grows, each one is a product of a specific improvisational logic. The writers gave themselves the constraint of the false memory premise and used it to generate the widest possible range of absurd characters, each one coherent within the genre logic of whatever flashback delivered them. There is a butler named Mr. Beauregard, impeccably dressed and deeply loyal, manifesting from a period drama memory. There is a woman who is a refrigerator, Mrs. Refrigerator, whose memory involves a beach holiday. There is Photography Raptor, a dinosaur with a camera who apparently documented important family moments in what the family is now certain was a significant period of their lives. The parade of creations works because each one commits fully to its own internal logic while being completely wrong as a member of an ordinary American family. Sleepy Gary is the parasite that cuts the deepest. He arrives in the memory of being Jerry's close friend, the kind of easy, uncomplicated male friendship that Jerry has probably always wanted and never quite managed. But the memories compound. Gary and Jerry at the beach together, Gary and Jerry in quiet conversation, and then a memory surfaces of the two of them kissing, which establishes something much stranger and more disorienting than a simple friendship. The parasites have implanted the memory of a romantic relationship between Jerry and a creature that does not exist, and the memory is warm and detailed enough that Jerry cannot immediately reject it. Beth kills Sleepy Gary eventually because she has no positive memory of him and therefore knows he is not real to her. But Jerry's relationship to the memory does not simply end when the parasite dies. He grieves. The love that was implanted was not his to have, but the loss is real regardless. Pencilvester is less emotionally devastating and considerably more aesthetically absurd. He is an anthropomorphized pencil wearing a monocle. He is the closest friend Rick apparently has in the episode, the kind of figure who shows up in warm, affectionate memories and offers unconditional support in a way that real Morty, with his anxiety and his objections and his inconvenient conscience, does not. Some fan analysis of the episode has pointed out that the parasite characters seem calibrated to give each family member the version of a relationship they most want, which means Pencilvester is what Rick's subconscious identifies as the ideal companion, uncritical, enthusiastic, and shaped like a writing instrument. Rick shoots him without apparent sentiment. The pattern holds. He identified the limitation, and once identified, he follows it without hesitation. Real relationships are not made only of good memories. This is the insight Morty reaches during the episode's climax, and it is both simple enough to state in a single sentence and specific enough to Rick and Morty's worldview that it carries considerable weight when it arrives. Morty is trying to figure out how to tell parasites from real family members, and the mechanism clicks into place when he thinks about his actual memories of Rick. Rick has been dismissive, reckless, and occasionally cruel in ways that no parasite memory would ever generate, because negative experiences do not serve the parasite's reproductive logic. Morty has plenty of bad memories of Rick. That proves Rick is real. The evidence for authenticity is the existence of pain. Negative memories, applied as a test, become the episode's weapon. The family members check themselves against one another, invoking memories of bad moments, failed moments, moments of anger and embarrassment, and small cruelties. Summer proving her realness with a memory of kicking Morty in a sensitive place for something he did not actually do. Rick proving Morty's realness with a memory of insulting and belittling him on an adventure. Beth's memories of her father abandoning her during childhood, which are not comfortable to revisit but are absolutely genuine. The bad memories act as passports. The family moves through the room verifying each other, and the parasites, unable to produce any negative experience, are exposed and eliminated. Jerry has no bad memories of Sleepy Gary. This is the detail the episode holds for a moment, because it means something uncomfortable about Jerry's marriage. Beth is verifiable. Beth has bad memories of Jerry, and Jerry has bad memories of Beth, which is the proof they need to confirm each other's reality. But the warmth of the fake relationship, the ease and comfort of a love that was designed to feel better than anything real, leaves a residue that the episode does not fully resolve. Killing the parasites one by one produces an action sequence that the show plays as both viscerally satisfying and comedically absurd, because each creature's death also involves the loss of a warm memory that everyone in the room believed in until a few minutes ago. Photography Raptor dies. The memories of being photographed on vacations and at holidays, all of them false, dissolve. The visual style shifts that accompanied each flashback disappear. The room gets quieter as the cast of invented characters is systematically removed from it, each one taking a fabricated version of a cherished moment with them. Shooting Mr. Poopy Butthole is where the episode's ending earns its weight. He has been present throughout, a small yellow figure with a top hat who is enthusiastic and cheerful and absolutely impossible to place in any normal version of this family's life. He appears in the opening credits of this particular episode in a way that flags him as suspicious, inserted into the existing credit sequence as if he has always been there. Beth has no bad memories of him. By the internal logic the episode has established, this should mean he is a parasite. Beth shoots him. Mr. Poopy Butthole is real. He collapses on the floor, badly injured, and the shot is not played for laughs. He asks the family not to visit him while he recovers because he needs time. Beth's face registers what she did with the specific expression of someone who applied a rule correctly and still destroyed something. The post-credits scene shows the family at his rehabilitation. The damage is real and ongoing. He is learning to walk again. The show uses this ending to complicate the episode's own thesis. The logic of bad memories identifying real people worked for every other character, and it still left room for Beth to shoot someone genuinely real who simply happened to have a warm relationship with the family. Genuine relationships containing bad memories is not, the episode is careful to demonstrate, the complete picture. Mr. Poopy Butthole's realness was not disproved by the absence of bad memories. The test worked well enough to save the family and still produced a consequence the test did not prevent. The episode does not walk back its central idea so much as it adds a layer of uncertainty to it. The logic holds, mostly, and it costs something when it doesn't. Mike McMahon, who wrote the episode, drew his initial inspiration from a specific storytelling problem that the television series Buffy the Vampire Slayer solved by doing something extremely strange. At the start of the show's 5th season, a character named Dawn appears as Buffy's younger sister. She is treated as if she has always been there. The other characters have memories of her that span years. The audience, who has watched 4 seasons without a Dawn, has no such memories. For a period, the show maintains both conditions simultaneously. A character who is genuinely new to the audience and genuinely established in the world of the show, with the resulting dissonance generating something closer to unease than comedy. McMahon took that mechanism and reframed it as horror, as a biological invasion that used the human relationship to memory against the very people doing the remembering. Inspired by that Buffy season, the episode also draws on John Carpenter's 1982 film, The Thing, cited by one of the writers in the episode's commentary track. In The Fly, an alien organism in the film that can perfectly replicate any living being it absorbs, generating imitations so complete that the original becomes functionally indistinguishable from the copy. The parasites in Total Recall operate on a related principle, inserting themselves into the past rather than replacing someone in the present. The result is the same, a thing that looks like belonging and functions like belonging, but is not belonging, waiting to be identified by whoever is smart enough to apply the right test. Identity, within the episode's logic, is partly constituted by discomfort. The argument underneath the premise is that knowing someone, really knowing them, means having access to their worst moments as well as their best. A relationship made entirely of warmth is not a relationship. It is a performance, or an infestation, or a memory generated by something that wants something from you. The friction, the disappointment, the arguments and the failures and the moments that did not reflect well on anyone involved, those are not interruptions to the real relationship. They are part of what makes the relationship verifiable as real. Love, in the episode's most stripped-down argument, leaves marks. Not always damaging ones, but marks nonetheless. And the characters who cannot point to a single bad memory are the ones with something to hide. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Total Recall discovered that the evidence of a real relationship is everything it puts you through. Next, the episode that separated Rick and Morty from their worst qualities and then asked what exactly was left once the worst of them walked out the door. Section 5. Rest and Ricklaxation. Exhausted from an adventure they barely survived, Rick and Morty limp back from what was supposed to be a quick 20-minute mission. Rick had promised something simple. What followed was a harrowing sequence that the show stages as a parody of the opening act of a science fiction blockbuster, all frantic escapes and near-death situations, ending with two people who need to sit down somewhere quiet and not be chased by anything for a while. The episode does not linger on the specifics of the adventure. The aftermath is what matters. Both of them are wrung out in the particular way that too much danger produces. Not injured, not broken, but hollowed, in a way that sleep cannot fix. Rest and Ricklaxation, the 6th episode of the 3rd season, aired August 27, 2017, written by Tom Kaufman and directed by Anthony Chun. The episode takes a premise that sounds like it could produce a light, comedic episode about relaxation gone wrong, and uses it to do something much more unsettling with the two central characters than any monster of the week could manage. At the alien spa, the machine that the episode revolves around is described simply. It removes cognitive toxins to purify the system. The framing is medical and neutral, as if the process is equivalent to a deep tissue massage or a cleanse, something a wellness brochure might describe without anyone raising an objection. What the machine actually does is extract every personality trait that the person using it believes to be their worst quality, remove it physically from the body, and relocate it into a separate chamber. The extracted material takes form in a contained toxic dimension. What remains in the original body is everything that person considers healthy, functional, and good about themselves. The catch, which the episode allows to develop slowly before making it explicit, is that the machine does not make an objective determination. It operates on the individual's own self-assessment. What gets removed is whatever the person believes is the problem, and what a person believes is their problem and what is actually their problem are not always the same thing. Split into two separate physical entities, the episode produces 4 characters from 2, a healthy Rick, a toxic Rick, a healthy Morty, and a toxic Morty. Each pair is complete. Neither half is a caricature or a fragment. Each is a fully functional person with a coherent personality, just assembled from different components. Toxic Rick is not simply Rick at his worst. He is Rick's narcissism, entitlement, rage, and crippling loneliness all concentrated into a single body. And alongside all of that, he also carries Rick's attachment to Morty. This last detail is the episode's most precise piece of character analysis. Rick, in his self-assessment, considers his care for Morty a weakness, an irrational attachment, something that compromises his judgment and makes him vulnerable. He places it in the same internal category as his worst impulses, and so when the machine removes what Rick himself identifies as toxic, the love goes with it. Toxic Rick does not just have Rick's cruelty, he has Rick's love, and in the context of everything else that was extracted alongside it, that love becomes desperate and possessive in a way that the original, balanced Rick keeps compressed and hidden. Healthy Rick, the version left behind after the extraction, is calm and polite. He expresses warmth toward his family in clear, direct language, saying things the actual Rick would rarely say aloud. He is pleasant to be around, agreeable, and completely detached from Morty in any deep sense. He functions well. He is better behaved. He is also, in a way that the episode does not call attention to, but that sits in every scene he appears in, missing something essential. The warmth he expresses toward the family is real, but generic. The specific, complicated, agonized care he had for Morty specifically has been filed under weakness and extracted. Healthy Rick is fine. Healthy Rick does not need Morty. Stripped of his insecurity, anxiety, and excessive conscience, healthy Morty becomes someone the show has never shown before. A version of the character who is charming, self-assured, and at ease in his own skin. He is more popular at school than he has ever been. He says the right things at the right moments. He connects with people, including Jessica, in a way that the anxious, overthinking original Morty never manages. Watching the healthy version of him operate is initially played for humor, but the longer it continues, the more wrong it starts to feel, and the episode is careful about precisely where the wrongness lives. Confident and without anxiety, Morty is also without conscience. The insecurity and the anxiety that the machine extracted were not just defects. They were the source of his empathy, his moral hesitation, his tendency to ask whether something is the right thing to do before doing it. The version of Morty that considers other people's feelings inconvenient is not a better version of Morty. He is charming in the way that a surface can be charming, smoothly and without substance underneath. The episode makes this clear when healthy Morty evades Rick after the detox session ends, jetpacking away from the reunion and choosing his new self over his old life. Stock trading in New York City becomes healthy Morty's career within 3 weeks of his escape. He runs from his family, assumes a fake identity, and applies his intelligence and natural charm without any of the ethical hesitation that previously slowed him down. A coworker calls him a little monster. Rick, tracking him down, describes him as a tiny American psycho, a reference to the Patrick Bateman character, a figure of polished exterior and total internal vacancy. The description lands because it is precise. Healthy Morty is not evil. He does not wish harm on anyone. He simply does not register anyone else's experience as something that matters more than his own preferences. The anxiety and guilt that his original self carries as a burden were also the mechanisms by which other people's pain reached him. Stacy ends up trapped in the toxic dimension through an accident involving a safe word and a device that was never meant to be used the way Morty used it. She is a casualty of healthy Morty's carelessness, a girl caught in the mechanics of a situation she had no way to understand or consent to. The episode does not dwell on her. She appears in the post-credits scene screaming the safe word, released back into the real world after however long she spent in the toxic dimension. The show plays her return as a punchline, but the logistics of what happened to her are not comfortable to think about too carefully. Attachment is what gives Toxic Rick his leverage in the toxic dimension. The two toxic extracts, Rick and Morty's worst qualities embodied, are trapped together in the nether realm, and Toxic Rick's entire orientation is around Morty. He talks about him, he wants to protect him. He cannot function without the object of his desperate affection. This version of Rick, stripped of the parts that managed and suppressed the care, is consumed by it in a way that the full, integrated Rick would never allow to be visible. Toxic Rick declares himself a god. He proclaims dominance over the realm, and underneath all of it, he is simply someone who loves Morty more than he can manage and has nothing else to balance it against. Escaping the toxic dimension with Toxic Morty in tow, Toxic Rick breaks into the real world and begins escalating. He accesses a moonlight tower, a tall structure already present in the town, and uses it to broadcast a toxicity beam across the whole world, turning everyone into a version of what they hate most about themselves. The planet briefly becomes a place where every person's internalized self-criticism is physically enacted on them. The scale of the attack reflects Toxic Rick's logic. If the clean world does not have Morty in it, the clean world should suffer the consequences of that arrangement. Poisoning Toxic Morty is Healthy Rick's counterintuitive solution. Clean Rick, still calm and detached, works through the problem with the kind of cold, analytical clarity that has no emotional interference. He reasons that the original Rick considered his compassion for Morty a weakness, which means Toxic Rick inherited that compassion alongside the rage and the narcissism. If Toxic Rick has the love, then threatening Morty's life should force Toxic Rick to act. Clean Rick injects Toxic Morty with a lethal poison and announces the terms, Toxic Rick merges with Healthy Rick voluntarily, or Toxic Morty dies. Toxic Rick, consumed by his attachment, has no choice available that he can live with. He merges, furious. The original Rick, with all his components restored, returns. Refusing to merge is Healthy Morty's initial response when Rick comes for him. He does not want to go back. He is aware of exactly what remerging means, the return of the anxiety, the self-doubt, the guilty conscience, the social awkwardness, the constant low-level misery of being a kid who feels everything too much and cannot stop. The life he built in 3 weeks is not a fantasy. He earned it. He is good at it. The argument that the real Morty is better for having his worst qualities back is not one that Healthy Morty finds persuasive, and the episode allows him the intelligence to articulate why. He is not wrong about what he would lose. Leverage is ultimately what brings him back. Rick injects toxic Morty back into him over his objection. The original Morty is restored, miserable, and immediately aware of exactly what he lost and why it is gone. He says so. He is glad to know how much Rick cared, he tells Rick, referring to the lengths Rick went to in order to restore him. Rick denies that caring was the motivation. The denial is unconvincing. The episode ends with the revelation that Jessica had been involved in tracking down healthy Morty, and the awkward truth of why, which is that Rick had been contacting her while drunk and asking whether she had found a new Morty yet, a detail that lands precisely on what the episode has been establishing about the nature of Rick's attachment. Self-image is the episode's most precise philosophical point. The machine does not identify what is objectively harmful in a person's psychology. It removes what the person has already decided is the problem, which means it is only as accurate as the person using it is honest and perceptive about themselves. Rick thinks his love is a weakness. The machine confirms this by extracting it, but the love was also the thing that made him capable of caring enough to track Morty down across the country and fight to restore him, and the episode trusts the viewer to hold both of those truths simultaneously. The love is a liability, and the love is the point. Codependency is the word that floats above the episode without ever being said aloud. The show is too precise to apply a clinical label to the relationship and leave it there. What the episode demonstrates is that two people whose worst qualities are intertwined with their best qualities cannot be cleanly separated into better and worse versions without losing something essential in the process. The healthy versions of Rick and Morty are better by almost every measurable standard. They are also, in ways that matter more than those standards suggest, incomplete. Tom Kaufman's script does not frame the episode as a tragedy or a condemnation of the relationship. It presents both conditions, the integrated and the separated, with equal clarity, and lets the audience decide what the balance sheet means. Neither the toxic half nor the healthy half is the real person. The real person is the full combination, including the parts that cause damage and the parts that prevent it, living in the same body and in constant negotiation with each other. Absence of the attachment does not produce a better Rick. It produces a Rick who is pleasant and functional and will not be drunk dialing Jessica to ask if she has found a replacement. What the episode argues, without arguing, is that the crippling loneliness and the irrational attachment and the care that Rick files under weakness are also exactly the things that make him worth caring about in return. Something in the dynamic between Rick and Morty depends on both of them being difficult. The anxiety and the arrogance and the guilt and the need are not decorations on top of the relationship. They are the relationship. And the episode makes this case not through any declaration, but through the simple demonstration of what remains when they are gone. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rest and Ricklaxation found that the worst parts of Rick and Morty are also the parts that make them real. Next, the episode that sent Rick and Morty to Atlantis and spent the whole time somewhere else entirely. Section 6. The Ricklantis Mix-Up Tales from the Citadel is the actual title of the episode, displayed on screen in the opening credits. The marketing title, the one used to promote it and listed in schedules, was The Ricklantis Mix-Up, a name chosen specifically to mislead anyone trying to figure out in advance what the episode was about. The production team wanted the premise to remain hidden until the episode aired, and the best way to do that was to imply it was about something else entirely. A Ricklantis mix-up suggests Rick and Morty going to Atlantis. An adventure, creatures, underwater chaos. The actual episode contains none of this. Rick and Morty C-137 appear at the beginning, briefly, to refuse a request to donate to the Citadel's Restoration Fund. Then, they leave for Atlantis. The episode does not follow them. For the next 22 minutes, the show stays behind. Aired September 10, 2017, written by Ryan Ridley and Dan Guterman and directed by Dominic Polcino. The episode won the 2018 Annie Award for Outstanding Achievement in Writing for TV and Broadcast Production, one of the most prestigious awards in animation. The recognition was not for action or spectacle. It was for a piece of structural writing that used the anthology format to examine a fictional society from multiple angles simultaneously, in a way that most live-action drama would struggle to execute in twice the running time. Citadel is a trans-dimensional city in a pocket dimension not connected to any single reality. Its inhabitants are Ricks and Mortys pulled from across the infinite multiverse, a population of genius scientists and their grandsons living together in a closed system with its own economy, politics, class hierarchy, and law enforcement. The original Citadel was destroyed in the Season 3 premiere when Rick C-137 used it as part of an escape plan, teleporting the entire structure into the same airspace as a Galactic Federation prison, destroying both. By the time this episode airs, the Citadel has been rebuilt. The citizens are picking up the pieces. There is an election. There is a factory. There is a school. There is a police department, and none of the people running any of it are the Rick and Morty the show has been following since the beginning, which means the episode is free to do things with these characters that the main storyline cannot. Structured as a multi-strand narrative, the episode runs 3 simultaneous storylines through the Citadel without resolving any of them into each other until the election result collapses the episode's separate threads into a single devastating conclusion. The show does not announce the format or ease the viewer into it. The storylines begin, and they alternate, and the audience assembles the picture of the Citadel from the pieces each thread delivers. The technique is not unprecedented in television, but it is unusual in animation, and the episode executes it without any of the self-consciousness that format experimentation can sometimes generate. Cop Rick is the central figure of the first storyline. He is idealistic, newly assigned, and determined to conduct himself with integrity in a law enforcement environment that does not particularly reward integrity. His partner is Cop Morty, a veteran officer who is not what Cop Rick expected. The episode establishes the dynamic early and commits to it fully. Cop Morty is cynical, compromised, and actively prejudiced against Morty's, harboring the kind of contempt for his own group that the show draws as an explicit parallel to internalized discrimination. A Morty who has so thoroughly absorbed the system's low opinion of Morty's that he enforces it, who has concluded that being harder on Morty's than Rick's makes him more legitimate in a Rick-dominated institution. The subplot is structured as a direct homage to the film Training Day, with Cop Rick in the role of the idealistic newcomer discovering what his partner actually is. Corruption runs through the Citadel's police subplot at every level, and Cop Morty is not its origin but its result. The episode presents him without easy condemnation. He has been operating inside a broken system for long enough that his choices reflect the system's logic more than his own. Cop Rick, by contrast, maintains his standards until the situation forces him to watch Cop Morty cross a line that cannot be ignored, and the resolution does not deliver justice so much as it delivers institutional indifference. Cop Rick is eventually cleared of any wrongdoing, not because the right outcome was reached, but because the new administration has other priorities. The system continues. The conditions that produced Cop Morty are still in place. Simple Rick is the figure the episode uses to locate its emotional center. Somewhere in the Citadel's industrial sector, a Rick who chose a different kind of life is kept in a small room, connected to a machine. This Rick, at some point in his life, abandoned the path of relentless scientific ambition and chose instead to raise his daughter, to be present for her childhood, to experience the specific kind of joy that comes from watching a person you love exist and grow. The machine captures this. It finds the memory of that pure, uncomplicated happiness and harvests the brain chemistry it produces. Simple Rick sits in his room, reliving the moment his daughter was born, over and over, while the factory processes his neural output into a product. Factory workers, who are Mortys and lower-status Ricks, produce Simple Rick's wafers, using the emotion extracted from his captive mind. The product's slogan promises customers the chance to come home, to experience something that tastes of genuine, uncomplicated contentment in a world where that is rare. There are competing versions of the commercial during the episode, the one the factory uses officially and an alternate version captured by a Rick who got too close to the truth. Simple Rick, in the latter version, breaks through the memory and tells viewers directly that he is a prisoner. The factory responds by putting him back under. The episode does not spend long on Simple Rick. It does not need to. The image of a person imprisoned inside their own best memory, while the world outside profits from the extraction, is complete enough to carry everything it needs to carry without additional explanation. 4 Morty students cut class and set out for the wishing portal in a storyline the episode stages as a deliberate echo of the 1986 film Stand By Me, a coming-of-age story about young people walking towards something they have built into a larger significance than it will turn out to have. The Mortys in this thread have names and personalities distinct enough to function as individuals. One of them, called Morty the Morty or Slick, has been raised by a Rick who actually cared for him, which makes him unusual and slightly alienated from the ordinary Morty experience. They walk through the Citadel's outskirts, through the terrain that exists at the edge of a society's official story. And the episode uses the journey to fill in details about how the Citadel operates at the level of people who are not Rick and who are not running anything. Wishing Portal is not what the Mortys believe it to be. They find it. It is real. It is a feature of the Citadel's physical infrastructure that has generated a mythology of wish fulfillment among those who know about it but have not been close enough to understand what it actually is. What the portal does is dispose of unwanted material. It is the Citadel's garbage system. Slick, before the others can reach him, falls in. The portal does not grant his wishes. It destroys him. The episode treats this with restraint, not amplifying it with dramatic music or extended reaction. One of the group is gone. The others walk back. The mythology of the wishing portal continues to circulate in the Citadel unchanged, because the people who know what happened to Slick have no institutional mechanism to correct the record. Candidate Morty appears at the Citadel's presidential election with a platform built on the experience of being a Morty in a Rick-dominated society. He is articulate, measured, and possessed of a quality that none of the other candidates have. He sounds like someone who actually understands what his constituents have been through. The Ricks in the election dismiss him. They are certain he will lose. The established political structure of the Citadel, including a shadow council of Ricks who have been quietly running things behind the elected surface, considers a Morty winning to be outside the range of outcomes worth planning for. Populist rhetoric in the episode is not presented as inherently suspicious. Candidate Morty's arguments about the Citadel's class structure are accurate. Mortys are treated as second-class citizens. They work lower jobs, receive fewer resources, are assigned to Ricks as sidekicks, and barely regarded as individuals. When candidate Morty describes this in his debate performance, the audience responds because he is describing something real. The episode is careful not to frame his appeal as manufactured or cynical in its content. He is saying true things. The campaign manager Morty, who works alongside him, believes in the cause completely. The question of what candidate Morty actually intends is withheld until the result is already locked in. Election night delivers the outcome the Citadel's establishment considered impossible. Candidate Morty wins. The population of Mortys who make up a significant portion of the Citadel's citizenry have turned out for him. The moment of victory is staged without excessive celebration. There is a short speech. The music underneath it is not triumphant. The episode holds back on the conventional visual grammar of a political win, and the restraint is not accidental. Evil Morty is revealed in the final act. The music that accompanies the confirmation, a piece previously used at the end of the Season 1 episode where Evil Morty was first introduced, plays as the camera finds him, and viewers who remember the earlier episode feel the recognition like a door closing. Campaign manager Morty, who has received files containing proof of who President Morty actually is, confronts him at a rally and shoots him. President Morty survives. The campaign manager does not. The episode makes no extended scene of the revelation. The music plays. The eye patch is visible. The implication is complete. Bodies appear outside the Citadel's airlocks shortly after President Morty's inauguration. He has ordered the execution of the Shadow Council, the Ricks, who were actually controlling the Citadel behind the elected government. Their bodies float in the vacuum of space, dumped without ceremony, and the episode ends with that image and with campaign manager Morty's files drifting alongside them, the proof of who President Morty was rendered irrelevant by the speed of what he did first. The established order is gone. The new order is not an improvement on the old one, it is merely a different configuration of the same machinery. Power, in the episode's most sustained argument, does not become cleaner by changing hands. Evil Morty's takeover of the Citadel does not represent liberation for the Mortys he claimed to champion. He does not dismantle the structure that makes Mortys second class. He uses that structure, and the resentment it produces, as a ladder. Once he reaches the top, the ladder is no longer useful to him, and neither are the people on it. The episode does not comment on this explicitly. It simply shows the sequence of events, the speech about fairness, the election, the immediate execution of political rivals, the bodies in space. The gap between the campaign and the administration is the point. Broken institutions are what the episode is ultimately about, and the comparison critics reached for most often was the television series The Wire, a drama that used its serial structure to examine how systems perpetuate themselves regardless of the individuals moving through them. The Citadel in this episode functions the way the Wire's institutions function, as environments that shape and constrain the people inside them more than those people shape the environment. Cop Morty is what the police department makes him. Simple Rick is what the factory makes him. The Morty students are what the school and the Citadel's social hierarchy make them. And President Morty, whatever he started as, operates within the logic of the institution once he has access to it. Ryan Ridley and Dan Guterman's script earned its Annie Award by building a 22-minute episode that does the work of several hours of television without feeling compressed. Each of the episode's storylines is given enough space to generate genuine investment. Simple Rick lands emotionally. The Cop Rick and Cop Morty subplot develops a full arc. The Morty students feel like individuals. The election builds real suspense. The achievement is not just that multiple things happen simultaneously, but that each thing matters enough on its own terms that the viewer would want to spend more time with it. Political satire is not a mode Rick and Morty had leaned on heavily before this episode. The show's broader satirical targets tended to be philosophical rather than structural. The show poked at the meaning of life, the reliability of identity, the logic of science, the dysfunction of family. The Citadel episode goes further into social and institutional territory, examining how a society functions when the people who were supposed to be running it never had the interests of the majority in mind, and what happens when the majority decides to act on that information. The answer the episode offers is not optimistic. The majority acts, and the person who told the majority what they wanted to hear turns out to have had his own plans entirely. Beyond what the episode delivers as a standalone piece of television, it establishes Evil Morty as a force that the series will not resolve quickly or cheaply. He is now president of a trans-dimensional city-state with the resources of infinite parallel realities available to him and no institutional check on what he does next. And the Rick who created the conditions for all of this is on his way home from Atlantis, satisfied and confident that none of it will affect his life. He says so explicitly in the post-credits scene. The confidence is the episode's final joke. And like every other joke in Tales from the Citadel, it is not entirely funny. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Ricklantis mix-up built an entire political system out of the show's premise and dismantled it in 22 minutes. Next, the episode that opened a secret room under the garage and asked what it means when a person's worst memories are the only evidence that they are who they think they are. Section 7. Morty's Mind. Blowers under the garage. Behind a hidden panel, Rick has been keeping a secret. The room is lit in the specific way that laboratories in science fiction are lit. Cold, clinical, slightly too bright. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with neon vials, hundreds of them, each one containing a small quantity of fluid that glows in a particular color. Each vial has a name. The room has been here apparently for as long as the adventures have been happening. Morty has never seen it before because Morty has never been meant to see it. And the episode begins with Rick deciding, for reasons of convenience and control, to finally show him what he has been storing under the house. Third season, 8th episode, the show's traditional slot for what had previously been its interdimensional cable installments. The show had used those earlier episodes as free-form anthology breaks, inserting a collection of absurdist television segments improvised in the recording booth as a structural pause in the season. For Season 3, the format was replaced with something different. Rick announces the change himself in the episode's dialogue, calling it a free-form anthology format, and distinguishing it from the cable episodes in a way that underscores the show's awareness of its own patterns. The episode aired September 17, 2017, directed by Brian Newton, written by a team that included Mike McMahon, James Siciliano, Ryan Ridley, Dan Guterman, Justin Roiland, and Dan Harmon, and watched by 2.51 million viewers on its first broadcast. Vials in the room are organized by color, though Rick denies applying any system to them, insisting that anyone who thinks he would organize something like this is not giving him enough credit. The episode then proceeds to demonstrate, through the memories he pulls from each section, that the colors are absolutely meaningful and the system is entirely deliberate. Some contain what Morty asked to have removed, some contain what the family asked to have removed, and some contain something that changes the nature of everything the episode appeared to be about for the first two-thirds of its running time. Blue memories are Morty's mistakes, experiences he wanted gone because they were too painful or too humiliating to carry. These are the ones the episode presents first, and they are the category that makes intuitive sense. a young person, repeatedly thrown into situations no reasonable adult would consent to, accumulates a load of experiences that the brain cannot process and continue functioning normally. Rick offers a service. Morty takes it. The arrangement seems, at this stage of the episode, almost charitable. Truth Tortoise is the catalyst that opens the episode and triggers the room's reveal. The cold open finds Rick and Morty being chased through an M.C. Escher-style dimension of impossible staircases by a gothic figure demanding they return the creature. Rick's instruction is explicit. Do not look into the tortoise's eyes. Morty looks. The knowledge of everything pours into him. He drops the tortoise into a void. They escape, and Morty cannot function with what he now knows. Back at the house, he asks Rick to take it away. Rick takes him to the room and explains that this is the place where everything Morty has ever asked to have erased has been waiting for him. Moon Conspiracy is the first specific memory Rick shows him, labeled on its vial as Moonspiracy. Morty, looking through a telescope late at night, spots a figure on the surface of the moon. A man, or something that looks like one. The man eventually turns up as Morty's new school guidance counselor, and Morty spends weeks convinced the figure is planning something sinister, spreading the belief widely enough that it reaches the man directly. The man, confronted with evidence that his secret has been exposed, drives off and kills himself. Morty watches the memory of this play out and understands, without the experience of having lived through it, that his certainty about what he saw was the direct cause of a death. The memory was erased because he asked it to be. The episode does not comment further on it. Floop Floopian is the memory the episode uses to demonstrate how much damage good intentions can do in a universe that runs on rules no one consulted Morty about before handing him a body and a grandfather. The alien, whose species calls itself the Floop Floopian, has a religious belief system built around death at the hands of a warrior as the mechanism of achieving eternal afterlife. The alien approaches Rick, who agrees with the casual detachment of someone scheduling a minor appointment. While Rick uses the bathroom, Morty begins talking to the alien about faith, about evidence, about whether the afterlife can really be guaranteed if no one has confirmed it. The alien reconsiders. He tries to leave. He is struck by a passing car and immediately dragged to hell by dark spirits while Rick and Morty watch. Morty's intervention, driven by a genuine desire to introduce doubt as an act of respect for the alien's autonomous reasoning, sent a being who would have died in ecstasy into eternal torment instead. Squirrels are the memory the episode saves for its most consequential reveal about the nature of where Rick and Morty actually live. Rick builds Morty an animal translation device at his request. Morty wanders the neighborhood listening to birdsong and insect communication, and then turns the device toward a group of squirrels in a park. What he hears is an active, coordinated global conspiracy. The squirrels are not animals in any sense that the word implies passivity or simplicity. They are running something. Morty, unable to act normally around them afterward, attracts their suspicion. They mobilize. Rick and Morty flee to a different dimension to escape. The memory was erased and the dimension swap happened, and nobody mentioned it. The episode treats this as comedy. The continuity implications are not comedy, and the show is aware of the difference. Red vials are Rick's memories. This is the revelation the episode has been building toward, and the moment Morty reaches it is the episode's turning point. The memories in the red section are not Morty's trauma, they are Rick's embarrassments. Mistakes Rick made that he did not want Morty to have access to. Moments when Rick was wrong or foolish or caught in a situation his intelligence did not successfully prevent. Rick killed a creature named Bebo for warmth on what he believed was a planet with a deadly cold night, only to discover they were on the wrong planet entirely and the death was completely unnecessary. He found this memory too damaging to his image to allow Morty to retain it, so he extracted it. He did the same with several others. The room under the garage, which began the episode as a storage facility for Morty's pain, turns out to also be a storage facility for Rick's dignity, maintained at Morty's expense. Erasing memories to protect an ego is a different category of action than erasing them to protect a person. The episode draws this line carefully and then puts it in front of Morty directly, because he sees the red vials and he understands immediately what they mean. Rick has been not only managing Morty's trauma, but also curating Morty's perception of Rick, selectively removing the experiences that would allow Morty to challenge him, doubt him, or simply have ammunition in an argument. The service Rick provided was real, the consent was not, and the combination of those two facts is what drives Morty to attack Rick in the middle of the room. Accidental discharge during the fight erases both of them simultaneously. The memory gun goes off, the extraction hits both Rick and Morty at once, and the two of them are left sitting in the room with no idea who they are, who the other person is, or why they are surrounded by hundreds of glowing vials of biological material. They attempt to reconstruct themselves from the contents of the room, injecting random memories, assembling fragments of a self from whatever they can reach. The process does not go well. The fragments do not cohere into anything usable. They look at what surrounds them and decide, by a logic that has more to do with despair than reasoning, that whoever they apparently were is not someone worth going back to. Both of them conclude, independently and then together, that they should not bother trying to find out who they were. They agree to die. The tone of the agreement is not tragic. It is matter of fact, the conclusion of two people who have assessed the available evidence and made a rational determination. The show stages this with the same comedic flat affect it uses throughout, which makes the content of the scene stranger rather than lighter. Two people, sitting in a room of their own extracted memories, deciding that whatever the memories add up to is not worth reconstructing. They reach for a means to end it. Nonchalance is the register Summer brings to the room when she walks in and finds them. She has clearly seen this before. There is a contingency plan in place, a backup system for this specific scenario, and she executes it without apparent emotion. She sedates them. She restores both their memories using copies kept for exactly this purpose. She drags them back to the living room and places them on the couch. They wake up believing they slept through an interdimensional cable episode. They argue about how that could have happened. She mutters, with the exhaustion of someone who has said this too many times to feel anything while saying it, that this is why they are constantly fighting and behind schedule. Post-credits, the show finds Jerry in Rick's garage. He has discovered a box labeled Jerry's Mind Blowers. The vials inside are not glowing neon tubes. They are VHS cassettes, the storage format of someone the Citadel stores in parking lots, and that Rick cannot be bothered to give a proper archive to. Jerry plays one. He watches a memory of himself at a drive-in, talking to an alien in the back seat, leaving and somehow not noticing the alien was still there. The alien died in his car. Jerry has been carrying, without knowing it, the memory of having accidentally killed someone, recorded on videotape and kept in his grandfather-in-law's garage. The episode ends there. Questions about who Morty actually is are what the room raises, and the episode does not resolve. Every memory in those vials is an experience Morty has had. Collectively, they constitute a version of his history that is fuller and stranger than the one he carries. The person he believes himself to be. The Morty who exists on any given day and makes decisions based on who he is and what he has been through is a curated version of a fuller person. Rick has been editing the archive. The experiences Morty retained after each erasure are not everything that happened. They are what Rick decided to let him keep. Continuity within the episode creates a puzzle that the show deliberately leaves unresolved. One of the red memories shows Rick and Morty fleeing to a different dimension to escape the squirrel conspiracy. But Morty has already been living in a replacement dimension since the events of the Season 1 episode where he buried himself in the backyard. A second dimension swap would mean Morty is now a triple replacement, living in a dimension with a family that was never any version of his family. The episode does not address this. Some analysis of the episode has suggested that the continuity discrepancy implies this episode takes place in a different dimension entirely, that the Rick and Morty here are not the C-137 pair the show has been following. The show neither confirms nor denies this. The vials sit in the room under a garage that may or may not be the one the audience has seen for 3 seasons, and the question of which Morty is watching is left to whoever is paying close enough attention to notice it. Each vial in the room is a piece of someone the episode argues you do not have full access to when that someone is Morty. The room exists because the adventures are too much to carry and because Rick has decided, repeatedly and without asking, what parts of those adventures Morty deserves to keep. The control is almost total, and the most disturbing part is not the erasures Morty asked for, because those at least represent his own relationship with his own mind. The most disturbing part is the red section, the wall of memories kept not to protect Morty, but to protect Rick from being seen clearly by the person who trusts him most. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Morty's Mind Blowers found the archive of everything Morty was allowed to forget, and the things Rick never wanted him to remember. Next, the episode that gave Morty a device to save his place in life and then spent 20 minutes showing exactly what that costs. Section 8. The Vat of Acid. Episode. Acid, in its practical application, dissolves things. Rick's plan is that it appears to dissolve things. The episode opens with Rick and Morty attending a crystal exchange with a pair of alien gangsters at a factory. A deal that goes wrong in the predictable way deals with alien gangsters go wrong. Rick, who anticipated the double cross, pulls Morty into a vat of liquid he has preloaded with floating bones and positioned specifically to make it look like both of them dissolved on contact. The gangsters believe it. Rick and Morty breathe through hidden tubes and wait. When the enemies leave, they climb out. Morty is furious. The plan worked, but working is not the same as being a good plan, and Morty's patience for being submerged in fake acid while pretending to be dead has reached its limit. On the flight home, the argument that produces the episode's entire premise begins. Jacob Hare directed the episode, which was written by Jeff Loveness and Albro Lundy and aired May 17, 2020, as the 8th episode of the 4th season. It won the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program, the show's second Emmy win after Pickle Rick. The award recognized an episode that operates on several levels simultaneously. A structurally elegant comedy, a formally devastating love story compressed into 4 minutes, and one of the most precise examinations the show has produced of the specific nature of Rick's cruelty and what it costs Morty to be on the receiving end of it. Deal mechanics are not what Morty is angry about. He is angry about the idea. The acid vat plan is, in his view, unnecessary, overdone, and reflective of Rick's tendency to treat dramatic contingency schemes as a substitute for practical thinking. If Rick can disintegrate the gangsters with a death ray in under 5 seconds, which he can and eventually does, the elaborate fake death setup with pre-positioned bones and breathing tubes required significantly more preparation for a worse result. Morty says this plainly and at length on the way home, and what makes the argument land is that he is correct. He is correct, and Rick knows it, and Rick cannot stand it. Argument escalates, as arguments between them often do, into each of them citing the other's failings as proof of a larger point. Morty's accumulated grievance is that his ideas are always dismissed. He names one, a device that works like a save point in a video game, allowing the user to mark a moment in time and reload to that moment if something goes wrong. Live without permanent consequences. Try things. Go back. Rick immediately dismisses it, and Morty taunts him into building it by suggesting he probably cannot. Futurama is where the concept came from, and the episode makes Rick say this out loud, in dialogue, naming the show and acknowledging that the save point device was explored in Futurama's 7th season finale. The self-awareness of the reference is in keeping with the episode's overall approach, which is to be completely transparent about the structural elements it is working with, while using those elements in a way that produces something the reference did not. Rick builds the device. He hands it to Morty without explaining how it works. This absence of explanation is the episode's central mechanism, and everything that follows depends on Morty not knowing the truth. Using the device feels like freedom. Morty presses the button to save his place, tries something reckless, reloads when the consequences arrive, and discovers that reality appears to snap back to exactly the moment he saved. He commits crimes. He embarrasses people who annoyed him. He reloads, and the damage is gone. He takes risks he would never take if the outcomes were permanent, because the outcomes are not permanent, because he can always go back. The montage of him doing this is set to Eric Clapton's "It's in the Way That You Use It," a song choice the episode deploys with a precision that makes the irony available without underlining it. He is using the device the way a person uses an object they do not actually understand. Recklessness reaches its natural limit when Morty meets a girl. She has no name in the episode. The show does not give her one. She is identified entirely by her relationship to Morty and by what happens inside it, which is that it becomes real. They meet by accident. They talk. Something connects. Morty saves his point before anything significant occurs, which at that stage is just habit, the same precaution he applies to everything. He does not expect it to matter. Unnamed but completely present, the girl becomes the episode's emotional center over the next 4 minutes. The relationship that follows is rendered without dialogue, only images, cut to music. Every beat of it is recognizable. The early awkwardness that settles into ease, the first real comfort of being with someone, the small disagreements, the larger disagreements, the repairs. The montage has been compared to the opening sequence of the Pixar film Up, which similarly uses silence and music to compress an entire relationship into a few minutes. Both are trying to make the viewer feel the weight of time passing inside a person, and both largely succeed. By the time the plane crashes, the audience has spent enough time with Morty and the girl that the emergency is genuinely frightening. Stranded in mountains after a crash that kills most of the other passengers, Morty and the girl survive together. They eat what they can. They make decisions that cannot be undone and that bind them to each other in ways that are not comfortable to describe. They are eventually rescued. They come home. At every point during the survival sequence, Morty's last saved position is the moment before he met her. Using the device would erase the entire relationship, and he knows it and chooses not to use it. This is the episode's quiet thesis, stated through action rather than dialogue. The relationship is worth keeping, even with everything terrible that happened inside it. The consequences are part of what it was. Choice, in the episode's most essential moment, is what Jerry removes. Morty and the girl come back, and the relationship is intact and damaged in the specific way that surviving something together leaves a relationship, and everything between them is real. Jerry, being Jerry, picks up the device and presses the button without knowing what it is. The save point is from before they met. The reload is instantaneous. The relationship is gone. Morty is standing in the moment before he first saw her, and she does not know him, and the year is not behind him but ahead of him. Except it is not ahead of him either because it already happened in a dimension that no longer exists. Recreating the connection fails. Morty tries to reach the same outcome by reproducing the circumstances, which is not how people work and not how love works, and the episode knows this and shows it failing with a specific kind of mercy. Quickly, without extended humiliation, he cannot find her again. In the attempt to fix things, he accidentally overwrites his own save point, which means the option to reload to any earlier position is also gone. He is standing in the wreckage of a plan that was never good, and the girl is gone, and the save point is gone, and the only thing left is whatever Rick is about to say. Revelation arrives through Rick explaining what the device actually was. Each time Morty pressed the reload button, he was not rewinding reality. He was being teleported to a parallel dimension where circumstances were identical to his save point, and the Morty who had been living in that dimension was killed to make space. Every crime Morty committed and reloaded away from happened. Every prank affected a real person. Every reset deposited Morty in a new reality by destroying the one who lived there. And the relationship existed in full, including the plane crash and the cannibalism and the rescue. In a version of the world where a Morty, who was not responsible for any of this, was removed to provide the vacancy. Infinite versions of Morty died. Rick confirms this plainly, and when Rick merges all the diverged realities back together to resolve the dimensional inconsistency the device created, Morty finds himself standing in the middle of everything he thought he had escaped. Every person he pranked, every situation he reloaded out of, every consequence he considered canceled, they are all there, accumulated into a single moment, looking at him. Surrounded by the full ledger of what the device did, Morty has only one place to go. He jumps into the fake acid vat. He lies there breathing through a hidden tube while the consequences he thought were reversible stand outside and wait for him. The plan Rick used at the beginning of the episode, the one Morty called unnecessary and stupid, is now the only available exit. Morty concedes the point without words. He is in the vat. Rick was right about the vat. Hiding in fake acid is the punchline, and it is earned through 20 minutes of construction so careful that the punchline lands as something more than comedy. Rick built the entire device, ran the elaborate scheme across infinite parallel realities, allowed Morty to fall in love and lose the love and fail to get it back, all in service of an argument that started because Morty criticized a fake vat of acid. The scale of what was inflicted for the sake of being right is so extreme that it becomes its own kind of argument. Rick is capable of this. Rick did this, and the thing Morty is hiding in is the proof that Rick was right. Pettiness at this scale is the episode's subject, and the show does not soften it. The device was not a gift or a lesson or a test. Co-writer Albro Lundy described it in interviews as an insane runaround to achieve another "I told you so." Rick built something that killed an infinite number of people who shared Morty's face, allowed Morty to fall genuinely and painfully in love and lose it, and subjected him to the full weight of every consequence he thought he had avoided, purely because Morty said the acid vat plan was dumb. There is no reading of the episode in which Rick comes out looking like someone who meant well. Consequences, as the episode understands them, are not punishments or failures. They are the material out of which a person is made. Morty admits this to Rick at the end of the episode, in the only terms Rick tends to accept. He concedes the point. He tells Rick he understands now that consequences determine who a person becomes and give a person's choices meaning. The speech is Morty being sincere, and it is also Morty giving Rick the victory he spent an infinite number of lives trying to arrange. Rick built a machine that proved a philosophical point by filling an uncountable number of parallel graveyards. The point is correct. The proof is monstrous. Both of these things are true at the same time, and the episode holds them both without flinching. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Vat of Acid episode showed exactly what Rick is willing to do to win an argument, and what it costs Morty to live next to that willingness. Next, the Season 5 finale that broke the multiverse open and revealed who built the walls around it. Section 9. Rick Mirai. Jack crows have been Rick's companions for the portion of Season 5 that preceded the finale. The running joke is that Rick, after a falling out with Morty, chose to spend his time with two crows instead of his grandson, and the show delivered on this premise by giving the arrangement its own anime aesthetic. The finale opens with Rick fully immersed in what the show treats as a separate series within the episode. He is a crow-themed warrior in a stylized anime world, fighting anthropomorphic owls in a rural village. His two crow sidekicks always present, his robot horse at the ready. Morty, aging as the sequence progresses, appears at intervals trying to reconnect. First as a teenager, then in his 20s, then in his 40s, telling Rick that Jerry died of cancer and Summer has married someone Rick would not approve of. Rick, the anime protagonist, is unmoved. The cold open is a complete self-contained parody before it gives way to what the episode actually came to do. 5th season, 10th episode, finale, aired September 5th, 2021, written by Jeff Loveness and Scott Martyr, directed by Jacob Hare. Loveness was writing his last episode of Rick and Morty before leaving the show to write films for Marvel Studios, and the episode carries the weight of someone who understood the opportunity in front of them. What Loveness and Martyr built into the finale was an accounting, the full ledger of Rick C-137's history, delivered in one push along with the resolution of an evil Morty storyline that had been building since a single shot at the end of Season 1. Anime as a formal choice for the episode's cold open is not decoration. The title Rick Mirai Jack references Samurai Jack, the animated series created by Genndy Tartakovsky about a warrior displaced in time by an ancient evil, spending decades seeking a way home and a way to destroy the thing that destroyed his family. The parallel is deliberate. Rick C-137 is Samurai Jack in the specifics that matter, a person whose life was shattered by an act of targeted violence, who has spent an enormous span of time pursuing the one responsible, who has become something formidable in the process of the pursuit, and something diminished in the same process. The Crow anime is parody, but the structure under the parody is being used seriously. Another Rick visited C-137 Rick's garage when his daughter Beth was young. This is the episode's backstory foundation, and the show stages it carefully. Rick Prime, a version of Rick from another dimension who had already developed portal technology, came to offer C-137 Rick access to that same technology. The offer was phrased as a recruitment. Join the multiverse. Come and see what exists beyond the walls of your one reality. C-137 Rick said no. He looked at the offer, thought about the life it would require, and said it sounded lonely. Rick Prime left. Sometime later he returned, not to renew the offer. Diane was C-137 Rick's wife. Young Beth was their daughter. Rick Prime killed both of them. A device left in C-137 Rick's garage detonated and took them, as Rick Prime's response to being refused, as punishment for not accepting what was being offered. The show confirmed that the backstory Rick had constructed and shown to the Galactic Federation in the Season 3 premiere was not a fabrication. It was real, or close enough to real that the differences do not change what it means. C-137 Rick lost his wife and his daughter to a version of himself who decided the refusal was worth killing over. Hunting down Rick Prime became the purpose that replaced everything else C-137 Rick had been. He finished building the portal gun, something Rick Prime's visit had started him thinking about. He traveled across dimensions looking for the specific Rick who did it, and because he could not distinguish Rick Prime from any other Rick through the portal technology alone, he killed Ricks. He moved through the multiverse in a long spree of violence motivated by grief and misdirected by the impossibility of finding the right target in an infinite supply of wrong ones. He met Bird Person during this period. He built relationships across dimensions that the show has referenced in passing for years without explaining how they began. He helped form the Citadel of Ricks, partly as a mechanism for pooling resources and partly because the Citadel was interested in neutralizing him. He eventually settled into the Prime dimension, where his Rick Prime would logically have to return home eventually, and waited. Depression arrived before Rick Prime did. The waiting stretched into years without a conclusion, and the certainty that eventually justified the plan softened into something less reliable. Rick Prime did not come home on any schedule Rick could predict, and the grief that had sustained the hunt for so long became harder to convert into forward motion without a target in front of him. He began to drink. The brilliant, terrifying momentum of the pursuit collapsed into the specific entropy of a person who no longer has a mission and has not yet located a reason to have one. He moved in with the Smith family, Beth's version of herself in this dimension, and the show as the audience has watched it began. Deliberately manufacturing the conditions for Mortis to exist is one of the revelations Evil Morty delivers about the Citadel's operations, and it reframes something that had always been treated as coincidence. The Citadel needed Mortys. Mortys functioned as a kind of neural camouflage, their brainwaves masking a Rick's genius signature from certain tracking technologies, making both the Rick and the Morty harder to locate in the multiverse. The Citadel solved the supply problem by engineering the relationship between Beth and Jerry across multiple dimensions, deliberately causing the two of them to meet in reality after reality to produce children who would become the Mortys the system required. They also cloned Mortis when the natural supply was insufficient. The show had asked for years why Rick and Morty travel together. This is part of the answer. "Bread for forgiveness" is Evil Morty's phrase, and the episode delivers it as one of its most damaging lines. The quality that makes Mortys useful to Ricks is not their intelligence or their adaptability. It is their capacity to forgive Rick for what Rick does to them. The Citadel selected for this quality. The Mortys who continued to function alongside their Ricks, despite everything those Ricks put them through, were the Mortys who survived and were replicated. The system optimized for the personality trait that made Mortis easiest to keep. Evil Morty tells Morty directly, there are not infinite versions of their grandfather. He is an infinite smear of one shitty old man, and Mortys are attached to him infinitely, through weakness and forgiveness. The speech is intended as a liberation. It lands as an indictment. Central Finite Curve is the name for the structure the episode identifies as the multiverse's organizing principle, at least within the portion of the multiverse that Ricks and Mortys have been navigating for 5 seasons. Evil Morty explains what it is and why it exists. The Citadel of Ricks created the curve as a mechanism for maintaining dominance. The curve is a boundary that separates the infinite universes of the multiverse into 2 groups, the universes where Rick is the smartest being and everything else. Every dimension accessible through a standard portal gun sits within the curve. Every adventure the show has depicted takes place inside it. The Ricks who built the curve did so because they could not tolerate a reality in which they were not the most powerful presence, and so they walled off the portion of the multiverse where that condition held and called it the whole universe. Wall around infinity is Evil Morty's description, and he delivers it as both a technical explanation and an accusation. Every Morty who has ever existed inside the curve has spent their entire life in a crib built around an infinitely fragile ego. The system that presents itself as Rick's dominion is actually a cage, and the cage was built for Rick's benefit at everyone else's expense. The Ricklantis mix-up established that Ricks ran the Citadel for their own interests. This episode establishes that the Citadel was built inside a structure designed to ensure that Ricks could never be challenged from outside. The scale of the control is total. Evil Morty's project, from his first appearance in Season 1 through his seizure of the Citadel's presidency, has been the destruction of that structure. Freedom outside the curve is what Evil Morty wants, and the episode does not frame this as simple villainy. His arguments about the curve are accurate. His accusations about how Mortys have been used are accurate. What makes him Evil Morty is not that he is wrong about the system, but that his response to the system involves burning everything down on the way out, including all the Ricks and Mortys on the Citadel who had nothing to do with the curve's construction and no power to dismantle it. He needed Rick C-137's brain scan to access the schematics for a portal device capable of breaching the curve, because C-137 Rick is the Rick most likely to have been involved in the curve's original design. He gets the scan, he builds the machine. The Citadel burns behind him as he works. Golden is the color of the portal Evil Morty builds to exit the curve. The show had established that standard portals are green, a consistent visual language across 5 seasons. The gold means something the show has not fully explained, a different kind of travel, a different kind of destination, a gateway into the portion of the multiverse where Ricks are not guaranteed to be the dominant force in every room. Evil Morty steps through. The golden light closes. He is gone from the central finite curve, gone from the show's accessible multiverse, and the episode does not tell the audience where he went or whether the place he went to is better or worse than the place he left. Left behind in the ruins of the Citadel, Rick and Morty are stranded together. The portal guns no longer work because the Citadel's portal network was sabotaged as part of Evil Morty's exit strategy. Rick C-137 has just watched his own backstory delivered to Morty by someone who accessed it from inside his head, and there is nothing left to deny or obscure. The fake memory he constructed for the Galactic Federation was mostly true. The grief was real. The hunt was real. The giving up was real. Morty knows all of it now. They sit in the wreckage and have to figure out where to go from here. Portrait of Rick C-137, assembled across 5 seasons and delivered in full in this episode, is a portrait of grief that became a mission, that became an institution, that became a cage, that someone else had to burn down before it could be seen clearly. The person who refused an offer that sounded lonely has spent decades building increasingly elaborate structures around the loneliness he refused to acknowledge. The Citadel, the central finite curve, the portal gun, the adventures, the Mortys. Every element of the system that defined the show's universe connects back to the moment a Rick came to a garage with an offer, and a different Rick said no, and the cost of that refusal was everyone else's freedom for generations. Purpose in Rick Mirai Jack is what every piece of the show's mythology was always building toward. The episode answers the questions the show had been accumulating. Why Rick came back? Why Beth has no memories of a father who was present? Why Wubba Lubba Dub Dub means what it means? Why the central finite curve was built? What Evil Morty has been planning across 3 seasons of patience. Loveness and Martyr constructed a finale that functions as a structural key to the series, locking the mythology into coherence without making the earlier episodes feel small. Everything meant something. The walls of the cage were visible from the beginning if someone knew where to look. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Rick Mirai Jack broke the wall around infinity and let the light in. Next, the episode that found a specific kind of mind-bending in the most ordinary place the show ever looked, a room where Rick turned himself into a vegetable to avoid a conversation. Section 10. Pickle. Rick, getting out of therapy takes planning. Most people manage it with a phone call or a rescheduled calendar entry. Rick Sanchez managed it by turning himself into a pickle, not canceling, not being unavailable. Molecularly restructuring his own body into a small green vegetable and waiting on a shelf in his garage until the session was over. The episode does not treat this as a failure of proportion. It treats it as completely consistent with who Rick is, which is the first and most important thing Pickle Rick has to say about him. Jessica Gao wrote the episode, which aired August 6, 2017, directed by Anthony Chun. Gao was the first writer in Rick and Morty history to win a solo Emmy for her work on the series, and Pickle Rick was the episode that won it, taking the Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program at the 70th Emmy Awards. The show had been nominated before, but this was the win for an episode that on its surface is about a pickle fighting rats in a sewer and that underneath is one of the most direct character studies the series ever attempted. Therapy is what the episode is structurally built around, and the therapy is not incidental to the pickle. Beth has been in contact with a therapist named Dr. Wong, and she has arranged for Summer and Morty to attend a session together to address behavioral issues both children have developed. Morty is urinating in his desk at school. Summer has been sniffing pottery enamel. Beth wants Dr. Wong to focus on these specific problems. The episode has a different idea about what the actual problem is, and it takes its time letting Dr. Wong get there. Dr. Wong is voiced by Susan Sarandon. The casting is specific and calibrated. Sarandon brings a calm that is not passive, an attentiveness that has already processed 1,000 versions of whatever the person in front of her is about to say. The character is competent in a way the show usually reserves for Rick alone, which is part of why the therapy storyline works as a counterweight to the action sequence. Dr. Wong does not need Rick to explain himself. She has already identified the pattern. She is waiting for the right moment to say it out loud. Avoidance is what Rick's transformation announces to everyone in the room, including Rick, which is why the episode works as more than a premise. The choice to become a pickle is not accidental or impulsive. Rick prepared the syringe that could reverse the transformation, set it on a shelf in a place Beth would find it, and then transformed himself in time to miss the appointment. The plan is elaborate for an excuse. It involves temporary disability, total inconvenience, and the genuine physical risk of what happens to a sentient pickle without legs in an ordinary domestic environment. Rick built a more complex mechanism for avoiding the session than he would have needed to simply not attend it. The episode knows this, and so does Dr. Wong. Sewer is where the episode deposits Rick almost immediately after the transformation goes wrong. Rain carries him off the workbench and down a drain before he can reverse course, and suddenly, the comedy is environmental survival. A pickle with no limbs and a genius-level brain is in a sewer, surrounded by cockroaches and rats, with no tools and no way to call for help. The show commits to this premise with the same completeness it commits to everything. Rick is not going to be rescued. He is going to solve this with whatever is available, using only his teeth and his mind, in one of the most inventive sequences of practical problem-solving the series has put on screen. Cockroach is the first material Rick works with. He rigs a cockroach into a mechanism using insect physiology as engineering, directing the creature's body like a remote-controlled system. He builds up from there, adding rat components as he defeats each successive rat, constructing a functional body from the parts of the things trying to kill him. The assembly of Pickle Rick's rat suit, piece by piece in the sewer, is animated as pure craft, each component added with logical purpose, each new capability unlocking the next problem. The sequence functions as both comedy and genuine ingenuity, and the balance between those two things is what the episode maintains across its entire runtime. Rambo is the cultural reference point the action storyline is parked closest to, though the episode accumulates other touchpoints as Rick makes his way out of the sewer and into the embassy where the episode's second act takes place. The fight sequences are choreographed with the specific grammar of 1980s action films, the lone figure against overwhelming odds, the improvised weapons, the corridor-clearing efficiency, the soundtrack that signals each escalation. Rick, covered in rat parts and dripping with things that should not be dripped in, moves through this register without parody turning into mockery. The action is played straight enough to be genuinely exciting, and the comedy comes from the persistent fact that the person doing all of this is a pickle. Embassy is where Concerto operates, and Concerto is where the episode's action climax builds to. Voiced by Peter Serafinowicz, the character is a direct reference to Liberace, a performer of extravagant showmanship, seated at a grand piano with an enormous candelabra, whose entire presentation is built around spectacle. The incongruity of Rick in rat armor dismantling a criminal organization to reach a Liberace parody at the center of it is the kind of escalating absurdity the show deploys when it wants to see how far a premise can go before it collapses. The premise does not collapse. Jaguar, voiced by Danny Trejo, arrives as a late addition and disposes of Concerto with a single action, after which Rick and Morty depart. The final joke of the action sequence is that the last threat was handled by someone else entirely, and Rick's punchline is that this is precisely why you do not go to therapy. Watching the therapy sequence alongside the sewer and embassy action, the show is asking the audience to hold both in mind simultaneously without the episode cutting rapidly between them. The therapy develops slowly, the way therapy does, while the action escalates at the pace of an action film. Beth starts by wanting to discuss Morty's desk urinating and Summer's enamel sniffing. Dr. Wong patiently does not get distracted by these specific symptoms. She is watching where the conversation actually wants to go. The family is describing the effects while carefully not discussing the cause, and Dr. Wong has enough patience to wait for them to get there without being pushed. Intelligence is the subject Dr. Wong eventually addresses directly, and she addresses it to Rick when he arrives at the session still wearing the rat suit, still covered in what was in the sewer. The speech she delivers is the episode's center of gravity, the point to which everything else has been aimed. She identifies the specific way Rick's family uses intelligence, as a substitute for engagement, as a mechanism for staying above the level at which emotion can reach them, as a justification for any behavior that produces discomfort in others. She tells Rick that his intelligence and the sickness in the family are connected by the same mechanism. Everyone in the family, Rick included, uses intelligence to justify the sickness. They have learned this from him, and they perform it back to him, and nobody in the room has the ability to feel things normally anymore, because feeling things normally has been established as beneath the level of thinking they are all supposed to be doing. Control is the word around which Dr. Wong builds her most precise accusation. She tells Rick that the one concept truly outside his ability to approach is that his mind is within his own control. He seems, she says, to alternate between seeing his intelligence as an unstoppable force and an inescapable curse, and the reason neither framing is accurate is that both of them remove agency. If his intelligence is a force or a curse, Rick does not have to take responsibility for how he uses it. He chose to become a pickle. He chose to come to the session. He chose to belittle therapy rather than engage with it. He is the master of his own universe, she tells him, and he arrived covered in rat blood and feces with his enormous mind literally vegetating by his own hand. The speech lands in the silence after it, the way a diagnosis lands, undeniable, unwelcome, and immediately visible to everyone in the room. Cultural impact from Pickle Rick was unlike anything else the show generated before or after it. The episode became the single most quoted, referenced, and merchandised moment in Rick and Morty's history, with the image of Rick as a pickle appearing on shirts and mugs and phone cases for years after broadcast. The joke that the most powerful being in the multiverse turned himself into a cucumber's cousin to avoid an inconvenient conversation became a shorthand for a specific kind of avoidance. A reference point that traveled far outside the show's existing audience and introduced a significant number of new viewers to the series. Comic-Con audiences were the first to see it. A rough-cut version of the animation premiered at San Diego Comic-Con in 2016, more than a year before the episode aired, and the reaction established what the finished product would become before the show had even completed it. The phrase entered conversation before the episode was finished. By the time it aired in August 2017, 2,300,000 viewers tuned in for the broadcast, and the anticipation had already been building for 14 months. Emmy recognition followed. Outstanding Animated Program, the 70th Annual Awards, Jessica Gao becoming the first writer to win solo for the series. The win acknowledged what the episode accomplished structurally as much as comedically, the precision with which Gao constructed two simultaneous narratives that are doing entirely different things and arrive at exactly the same place. The action storyline and the therapy storyline are not in opposition. They are the same argument made in different registers, both of them pointing at the same man sitting on a couch in a rat suit who was supposed to be in a sewer. Vegetating by his own hand is what Dr. Wong's speech identifies as the condition Rick has produced for himself, and the phrase is exact in a way that earns the recognition it received. Rick turned his enormous mind into a pickle. He applied the full force of his intelligence to the project of removing himself from a situation that required emotional engagement rather than intellectual performance. He won. He got away from the appointment, at least temporarily, and the cost of winning was spending an afternoon in a sewer, using cockroaches as tools, nearly dying multiple times, building a combat exoskeleton from rat corpses, and fighting his way through an embassy, which was objectively harder than going to therapy would have been. The episode makes this calculation quietly available throughout its runtime without stating it. By the time Dr. Wong states it, the math is already complete. Choosing to be a pickle is the show's most condensed statement about what Rick does with the space between who he is and who he could be. The episode does not suggest Rick is broken or irredeemable or even fundamentally worse than anyone else in the room. Dr. Wong's final assessment is that the family could prioritize the feelings they have for each other above the need to feel superior and right. She says this and offers to see any of them who want to come back. Beth asks what it costs. Rick says he'd rather be a pickle. The episode ends there, without resolution, because resolution is not what the episode is offering. It is offering a clear picture of the distance between what Rick is capable of and what Rick chooses to do with that capability, and leaving the audience to sit with what that distance means. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.